My name is Nora Calloway, and I was 34 years old. The afternoon my uncle slid a broken watch across a mahogany conference table and laughed. It was not a small laugh. It filled the room the way cigarette smoke fills a car with the windows up. My cousin Derek tilted back in his chair. My Aunt Sandra covered her smile with 2 fingers, but not far enough. The watch face was cracked along the lower left. The leather strap had gone stiff and split at the second hole. The crystal had a hairline fracture running from 7 o'clock to 11. It looked, to anyone who did not know what they were looking at, like a damaged old thing worth nothing at all. But here is what none of them knew. I had memorized the serial number on the back of that watch 8 years earlier, standing in my grandfather's workshop on a Saturday morning while he made coffee. I had run that number through every database I had access to, and the number on that case back was about to make every single person in that room go very, very quiet. Welcome back to House of Secrets, where every house has a secret room, and the woman they forgot about has had the key the whole time. If you are new here, drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every single one, and please subscribe. It genuinely helps more than you know. This story is only just beginning. Let me take you back to Millhaven, Ohio. Population 2,800. 1 grain elevator you could see from every road into town. 1 Methodist church with a split in the front steps that had been there since 1962 and would probably be there in 2062. 1 diner called Patsy's, where the coffee came in mugs that had been washed 10,000 times, and the eggs were always perfect, and everyone knew your name and your history before you sat down. My grandfather, Leonard Calloway, ran a watch and clock repair shop on the corner of Elm and 3rd for 38 years. The sign was hand-lettered in 1971. Calloway Timepieces. By the time I was old enough to read it, the black paint had softened to a dark gray that looked, on certain afternoons, almost silver. The shop smelled like machine oil and cedar, and the faint sweetness of the lubricant my grandfather kept in small brown glass bottles on the second shelf above the bench. I called it the smell of Saturday, because Saturday was the day he let me come in. I was 7 the first time he set a movement in front of me and told me to look at it and tell him what I saw. I said I saw a lot of tiny things. He said that was a good start. Leonard Calloway was 71 when I was born. Tall, narrow through the shoulders, with reading glasses on a chain, and hands that moved with a precision I did not have a word for until I was older, and learned the word dexterous, and understood it was not quite right either, because what his hands had was something closer to patience, made physical. He spoke in complete sentences, and never raised his voice, and had an opinion about almost everything, and shared it only when asked. My grandmother Ruth had passed when my father was 12, so it was Leonard and the shop and the 2 halves of the family that circled him like weather systems, each generating its own pressure. My father, Gary, was Leonard's younger son. He worked dispatch at the County Transit Authority and had a talent for being present in a room without taking up any space in it. Gentle, agreeable, the kind of man who changed his position when the room changed the subject. My mother, Diane, taught piano lessons out of our house on Birch Street and read every library book twice, and had noticed everything about everyone in Millhaven for 30 years, and said almost none of it out loud. Then there was my Uncle Philip, Leonard's older son. Philip sold commercial real estate out of an office in Dayton and drove back to Millhaven on holidays in a vehicle that was too large and too clean for our roads, and had the particular energy of a man who believed he had outgrown a place and wanted that belief confirmed by the people still living there. His wife Sandra taught spin classes, and had an opinion about everything that was not her business. Their son Derek was 4 years older than me, and had coasted through 38 years on the assumption that things would be arranged for him by virtue of being a Callaway male. I was the only grandchild who came to the shop on Saturdays. I know, because I asked once, when I was 12. I asked my grandfather if Derek had ever come in. He said Derek had come in once, when he was 9, and had asked if any of the watches were worth anything. My grandfather had said all of them were worth something to somebody. Derek had lost interest and left. My grandfather told me this without judgment. That was one of the things I loved most about him. What I was in that family was this: the one nobody was waiting on, the one who helped with the dishes, the one who asked questions nobody else thought to ask, the one who sat on the tall stool at the bench every Saturday for 11 years and learned to wind a mainspring and regulate a lever escapement, and read a movement the way other people read sentences. The capable, invisible one. The one who, at Christmas dinner when I was 15, heard my Uncle Philip say to my father over the pie that Derek was the one positioned to carry the Callaway name forward, and that was just the natural order of things. My father nodded. My mother looked at the tablecloth. I got up to help with dishes and stood at the sink and let the water run hot over my hands and filed that sentence away in a part of myself I did not yet have language for. I was always filing things. It was the only thing I knew to do with the things that hurt. I left Millhaven at 18 on a full academic scholarship to Ohio State. Mechanical engineering. My grandfather drove me to the bus station himself in the 1994 Buick he had driven since before I was born. Before I got on the bus, he pressed something into my hand. A small steel loop, watchmaker's grade, with a rubber grip worn smooth from decades of use. He had put a piece of tape on the barrel and written 3 letters in his careful small hand. N.L.C. Nora Leonard Callaway. He gave me his middle name. He said one thing to me at the platform. He said, "The ones who underestimate you will always tell you what they're after if you stay quiet long enough to listen." I did not cry on the bus. I cried at a rest stop somewhere outside Columbus, and then I washed my face and did not cry again. I graduated in 4 years and took a position at an authentication and appraisal firm in Columbus called Sterling Provenance Associates. We authenticated timepieces, jewelry, and estate objects for auction houses, probate courts, insurance companies, and private collections. My specific function was horology, watches and clocks, movements and cases, documentation and valuation. My job, in short, was to look at an object, determine exactly what it was, determine exactly what it was worth, and produce a report that would hold up in court. I was 26 when I was promoted to senior authenticator. I was the youngest person in the firm's history to hold that title. I came home to Millhaven twice a year, without exception. Thanksgiving and the second weekend in May, which was when Leonard held what he called his open bench day. One Saturday a year, when he offered free cleaning and regulation to anyone in town who brought in a timepiece. I worked beside him both days, every year. Philip and Sandra came to Thanksgiving. They did not come to the open bench days. The shop was not the kind of thing Philip valued in front of company. At Thanksgiving, my uncle asked about my job, with the careful curiosity of someone who finds a subject faintly embarrassing. He would say something like, "Still looking at old watches?" and then redirect himself to something he found more legible, like Derek's work at a commercial property firm in Dayton that Philip had introduced him to, or the square footage of their house in Oakwood, which had apparently increased since the last time it came up. In my 4th year at Sterling Provenance, I authenticated a pocket watch for an estate in Granville, a Hamilton 992B railway grade, manufactured 1944, in a plain nickel case the family had been told was worth perhaps $300 by a general estate liquidator. I examined the movement under magnification for 30 minutes. I cross-referenced the serial number against Hamilton production records and auction comparables and insurance filings. The watch was not common. A railroad collector in Pittsburgh had been looking for that exact reference in that exact grade of condition for 2 years. It sold at private sale for $4,800, 16 times the family's expectation. The serial number told me everything. I thought about my grandfather's loop when I filed that report. In the October of my 8th year at Sterling Providence, Leonard called me on a Thursday evening. His voice was what it had always been, low, unhurried, the voice of a man who had never found it necessary to fill silence with noise. He told me he had been to see a doctor. He told me the doctor had identified something worth paying attention to. He said he was not afraid, and he was not being dramatic, and he simply wanted me to know, and wanted to see me soon. I drove to Millhaven that Saturday. I brought him coffee from a place in Columbus he had liked the one time I had brought it before. He was thinner. The reading glasses were the same. The hands were the same, stained at the second knuckle on both index fingers, with lubricant that had stopped coming fully clean sometime in the 1980s. We sat in the shop after he turned the sign, the way we had always sat, with the smell of oil and cedar and the tick of 4 movements on the bench, and he told me what the doctor had said. His heart. Manageable for now. Not something to take for granted. He told me he had been to see his attorney. Her name was Marion Voss, and she had an office above the insurance agency on 3rd Street, and she had handled his affairs for 26 years. He had updated his estate documents. He said he wanted me to know he had thought carefully. I told him I did not need to know the details. He looked at me over his glasses and said, "There is a watch in the case. Bottom shelf, left side, green velvet tray. Do you know the one?" I knew the one. I had known it since I was 9 years old. A wristwatch in a plain steel case, brushed, not polished. The crystal was cracked. The crown was worn to a smooth nub. The leather strap was original and dry and splitting. It looked, to anyone without training, like a damaged watch of no particular significance. "I know the one," I said. He told me to look at the case back sometime when I had a moment. Then he asked me if I wanted to see what he was working on, and we spent the rest of the afternoon at the bench, and I did not look at the watch while he was there. On Sunday morning, while he was in the back of the shop making coffee, I picked up the watch from the green velvet tray with both hands, the way he had taught me, and I turned it over. The case back was plain brushed steel. I brought out the loop. I examined the surface under magnification. The serial number was engraved in characters small enough that you would need magnification to read them correctly. I counted 11 digits. I copied them into my phone exactly as they appeared, digit by digit, checking twice. Then I put the watch back in the tray, in the exact position I had found it, and went to the back, and drank coffee with my grandfather, and did not say a word. That evening, back in Columbus, I ran the serial number through every database I had access to: Sterling Providence's internal records, the Swiss Federal Archives, auction records from Christie's, Sotheby's, Phillips, Antiquorum, and 6 independent specialist houses in Europe and Japan, insurance filings, provenance documentation held at 3 museums, collector registration databases I had access to through professional memberships. The results came back across 3 hours, in pieces, each one narrowing the field. The watch in the green velvet tray was a Patek Philippe reference 1518 in steel. Manufactured 1943. One of 4 known examples in steel. The other 3 were in private collections in Switzerland, Japan, and the United States, all acquired at auction in the previous 15 years. The steel case, which had been brushed to a work-worn finish over 80 years of light use, was consistent with the watch having been a working piece rather than a display object. The movement, which I had seen my grandfather regulate himself in 2019 and again in 2022, was original and complete. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. The screen was the only light. I thought about my uncle saying Derek was the one positioned to carry the Calloway name forward. I thought about the way my father had nodded. I did not make a list. I did not start a file. I simply saved my research to a folder on my desktop that I labeled Saturday and went to bed. Leonard passed on a Wednesday morning in February, 7 years after that first conversation in the shop. He was 78 years old. He passed at home in the house where he had lived for 51 years. My father called me at 5:50 in the morning. I was already making coffee. I drove to Millhaven in 2 hours and 40 minutes. The funeral was on a Saturday, which felt right. The Methodist church was full past capacity. People stood in the vestibule and on the steps. Millhaven had 2,800 people, and roughly half of them came, because Leonard Calloway had spent 38 years being the person you brought your broken things to, and he had always, without exception, treated those things as worth his full attention. Philip gave the eulogy. He spoke for 14 minutes about legacy and the Calloway name and what his father had built. He did not mention the bench. He did not mention the 38 years. He did not mention the open bench days or the 11-year-old with a loop who came in every Saturday. He mentioned 3 times that he was the eldest son. I sat in the second row between my mother and my father and kept my face very still. The estate reading was scheduled for the following Friday at Marion Voss's office above the insurance agency. I had not met Marion Voss, but I had thought about her since the Saturday in the shop, 8 years earlier, when my grandfather had said her name in the quiet. Before I tell you what happened in that office, I need to pause and ask you something directly. Have you ever watched someone in your family look at something precious, a person, an object, an opportunity, and dismiss it completely because they could not see past the surface? Have you ever been the thing they dismissed? Drop it in the comments. I need to hear it. And if you are not subscribed yet, please do it right now, because this story is about to turn. The week between the funeral and the reading was the longest week I had spent in Millhaven since I was 18. I stayed in my parents' house on Birch Street. My mother cooked. My father sat in his chair. Philip and Sandra came over on Tuesday and Thursday, and both times the conversation moved, with the smooth inevitability of water finding a drain, toward the shop, and what would be done with it, and the building, and the estate. Philip had someone interested in the corner property, he mentioned, a developer out of Dayton who was doing mixed-use conversions in small markets. Good return on a building that size, he said. Clean exit. The shop had been more sentiment than business for years. He said this with a tone of practical sadness, the tone of a man delivering a reasonable conclusion he had reached well in advance of the conversation. My father nodded. My mother looked at her hands. I excused myself to help with dishes both times. On Thursday evening, Derek found me in the backyard. He had his hands in his pockets, and an expression I had catalogued from childhood. The expression of someone who wants something and has not yet settled on the approach. He told me he supposed Grandpa had left me some of the tools, sentimental things, which was fine. He said it the way you say something is fine when you mean it is acceptable to you specifically, because it costs you nothing. Then he said, almost carefully, that if there was anything in the shop with real value, actual dollar value, it would make more sense for that to stay within the direct family line. I looked at him for 5 seconds. Then I said I was sure the reading would clarify everything and went back inside. That night, I called Marion Voss. I had found her number through the Ohio State Bar Directory. She answered on the second ring. I introduced myself. She said she knew exactly who I was, and that she had hoped I would call before Friday. She said there were things she wanted me to understand before we were in a room with other people. She spoke for 19 minutes. I did not interrupt once. When she finished, I thanked her and ended the call and sat at the window in my childhood bedroom and looked out at the yard where the February grass was brown and the sky was the particular gray Ohio gets in winter that has no drama in it at all, only duration. I thought about 11 digits copied into my phone on a Sunday morning 8 years ago. I thought about my grandfather's voice on a bus platform. The ones who underestimate you will always tell you what they're after, if you stay quiet long enough to listen. I did not sleep much, not from dread, from the feeling of a long calculation finally resolving. The particular wakefulness of a result that has been running in the background for years and has finally returned a number. Marion Voss's office was warm and smelled like old paper and the particular sweetness of a cast-iron radiator working against a cold day. There were 6 of us around the table, Marion at the head, my father and mother on one side, Philip and Sandra on the other, Derek in a chair he had pulled up without being invited. Marion opened the folder without ceremony. She offered condolences in a voice that had offered them many times before, and still held weight. Then she began. The property, she said, had been placed into an irrevocable trust 11 years earlier. The trust held the building, the shop, its equipment, its inventory, and its client records. None of it would pass through probate. Philip's jaw tightened. That was the first physical thing I noted. She continued. To Gary Calloway, Leonard had left his personal library, his woodworking tools from the garage, and a savings account containing $38,000. $1,000 for every year he had operated the shop. My father made a sound I had not heard from him before. Something small and caught. To Philip Calloway, Leonard had left the 1989 Buick in the garage, his collection of Ohio history books, and a sealed letter. Marion slid an envelope across the table. Philip did not reach for it immediately. To Derek Calloway, Leonard had left the mantel clock from the front room, which had belonged to his mother, Ruth, and a card that said, "Time is not inherited. It is chosen." The room was quiet. Marion looked at me. To Nora Leonard Calloway, she said, Leonard left the shop, its contents, its lease documentation, its client records spanning 38 years, and one specific bequest, described in the trust instrument as the steel-cased wristwatch in the green velvet tray, bottom shelf left, in the display case behind the register, together with all authentication and provenance documentation, held in the locked second drawer of the workbench, accessible with the brass key on the chain, in the possession of Marion Voss, attorney of record. She set a small brass key on the table in front of me. That was when my Uncle Philip laughed. The laugh started low and built. He looked at Derek, and then at Sandra. A broken watch. He shook his head with the deliberate sadness of a man performing reasonableness in front of witnesses. "Pop left you a broken watch, Nora." He exhaled through his nose. That's about right, isn't it?" Sandra made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was built from the same material. Derek leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. My father looked at the table. I picked up the brass key, and turned it once between my fingers. Then I set it down in front of me and folded my hands on top of it and looked at Marion Voss. Marion looked back at me with the expression of a woman who has been waiting for this specific moment for 11 years and is entirely prepared to wait as long as necessary for it to fully arrive. Philip was still speaking. He had moved from the laugh into something more organized. He said the shop was a liability. The building needed structural work. The client base was aging. Watch repair in a town of 2,800 was not a viable business model, and he had a responsibility as the eldest son to make sure the estate was handled practically. He said he would be willing. He used that word, willing, with the particular inflation of a man who believes his willingness is a gift, willing to take the property off my hands at a number that would benefit everyone. He already had the developer's information. He could make a call that afternoon. I let him finish. Then I said, I would like to retrieve the documentation from the workbench before we continue. Philip said he did not see what documentation had to do with anything. I said quietly, I would like to retrieve the documentation from the workbench before we continue. Marion said that was entirely within the rights of the named beneficiary, and suggested a 15-minute recess. Philip began to say, that didn't seem necessary. Marion looked at him with the settled authority of a woman who had practiced law for 29 years, and had no interest in being redirected by someone else's sense of urgency. 15 minutes, she said. My father drove me to the shop. We did not speak. When he pulled up in front of the sign, the gray-silver letters, he put the car in park and sat looking at it. He said, she always meant it to be yours, your grandmother. She told Pop before she got sick. She said Nora is the one who understands what this is. I should have said so out loud a long time ago. I want you to know that. I nodded. I got out of the car. The shop was cold and still. The bench was exactly as he had left it. I found the second drawer with the brass key. Inside was a manila envelope, soft at the corners, with my name on the front in my grandfather's handwriting. Not Nora, just N. The way he had always addressed things to me that were specifically mine. Inside the envelope were 5 items. A receipt from a watchmaker's estate sale in Cincinnati, November 1961, showing a purchase price of $180 for a steel-cased wristwatch with serial number noted in my grandfather's hand. A service log, 62 years of entries, every cleaning, every regulation, every replacement part, recorded in his small, careful script. A letter from Sterling Provenance Associates, dated 14 months before his death, authenticating the watch as a genuine Patek Philippe reference, 1518 in steel, one of 4 known examples, and estimating current auction value in a range of $1.8 to $2.4 million. A signed letter from Marion Voss, confirming the watch had been independently appraised by 2 additional specialist houses in Geneva and New York, with valuations of $1.9 and $2.1 million respectively, and a personal letter from my grandfather, 4 pages, in his handwriting. I read it once, standing at the bench in the cold, in the smell of oil and cedar that was going to be mine to preserve or let go. Then I folded it and put it back in the envelope and locked the drawer. I drove back to Marion's office with the envelope on my lap and my hands level on the wheel. When I returned, Philip was on his phone, and Derek was scrolling, and Sandra was examining the painting on the wall with the focused attention of someone who is not looking at the painting at all. I sat down and opened the envelope and removed the 5 items and laid them on the table in order. The 1961 receipt, the service log, the Sterling Provenance authentication, the 2 independent appraisals. I placed the personal letter face down and left it. I pushed the sterling provenance letter to the center of the table. Sandra leaned forward first. I watched her read. I watched her reach the valuation range, $1.8 to $2.4 million. I watched something empty out of her face, the way water empties out of a glass, all at once, leaving no trace that it was ever full. Philip took the letter from her hands without asking. He read it. He read it again. His jaw did not tighten this time. Something different happened. A recalculation. The physical expression of a machine receiving data. It was not built to process. That, he started. He set the letter down. He looked at me. He looked at the letter. He picked it up again. This can't be. Pop would have told us. He would have said something. Grandfather told the people he trusted, I said. My voice was level. The authentication is dated. The firm is accredited. 2 independent appraisals confirm the range. The serial number on the letter matches the watch in the case. Derek had come forward out of his chair. He was reading over his father's shoulder, and his face was the face of someone finishing an arithmetic problem they very much did not want to complete. Philip set the letter down carefully. He straightened in his chair. His chin lifted. Something that was not quite composure reached for the surface and almost made it. He looked at me with an expression I recognized from Christmas dinner when I was 15. The expression of someone recalibrating toward generosity. At the moment, generosity has become necessary. Well, he said. He cleared his throat. Well, of course this is something we would want to handle as a family. An asset of this significance. That's a family decision. That's what Pop would have wanted. We work together. We come to something fair for everyone. He looked at me with the patient warmth of someone offering a gift they have just decided they cannot afford to withhold. Pop would have wanted, I said. I let that sit for 4 seconds. Then I picked up the personal letter and unfolded it and placed it face up on the table. In the letter, among the other things my grandfather had written, was this: I will read it to you, as I read it in that room, without performance. He wrote, I have watched this family make assumptions about Nora for 34 years. I have watched them look at her and see someone small. I have watched them look at the watch and see something broken. Nora looked at the watch and asked the right question. She has always asked the right question. She did not ask it because she wanted something. She asked it because that is how she moves through the world, with attention, with patience, with the understanding that the small things tell you what the large things are hiding. That is why the watch is hers. Not because I love her more, because she earned the right to understand what it is, and because the ones who laughed are the reason I made sure she would be the one holding the paper. The room was very quiet. Philip's mouth opened. It closed. It opened again and stayed there for a moment, without any words arriving to fill it. And then I heard the door. My father had come back in. He had not spoken in the meeting. He had not spoken on the drive to the shop. He had said what he needed to say to me in the parking lot in front of the sign, and then he had sat in the waiting area outside Marion's office for 45 minutes. But now he came back in. He walked around the table slowly, not with urgency, with the particular deliberateness of a man who has decided something and is not going to be hurried. He pulled the empty chair beside me out from the table and sat down in it and put his hand on my shoulder. He did not say a word. He simply moved himself to the side of the table where I was sitting and put his hand on my shoulder and kept it there. I want you to understand what that cost him. My father, Gary Calloway, who had nodded at Christmas dinner in 2005, who had agreed with whoever spoke last for 62 years, who had never, in my memory, chosen a side under pressure and held it. He crossed the room. He sat beside me. His hand on my shoulder weighed almost nothing, and it weighed everything. I did not look at him. I looked at Marion Voss, who was looking at the folder in front of her, with the expression of a woman who has witnessed this exact moment in different rooms across many years, and still finds it worth witnessing every time. The radiator ticked once. Outside on 3rd Street, a car passed. The sound came through the old window glass faintly, like something heard from another room. I picked up the brass key from the table. I turned it once in my fingers. Then I set it back down. "I believe we are finished here," I said. Philip did not contest the trust. Marion had prepared it with the thoroughness of someone who had anticipated exactly this conversation, and my grandfather had been of clear mind, and the documents were exact and properly witnessed, and there was nothing to contest. He left Marion's office without speaking to me. Sandra followed with her coat pulled tight. Derek paused at the door and looked back at me for a moment with an expression I could not categorize, and then he left too. My father and I sat in the conference room after everyone else had gone. Marion excused herself. We sat in the quiet, with the old paper smell, and the radiator, and the gray Ohio light coming through the window. "Your grandfather," my father said. "He was something." "He was," I said. "I should have." He stopped. He looked at his hands. "Christmas, when you were 15. I heard what Philip said, and He stopped again. I let him stop. I had spent a long time with what had happened at that table when I was 15, and somewhere in the years since I had set it down. Not forgiven, exactly. Set down. There is a difference. I was not going to pick it up in Marion Voss's conference room. "It's okay, Dad," I said, and I meant it as a complete sentence. The watch was consigned to auction 14 months later, a specialist sale in New York. Final hammer price, $2,140,000, the highest price ever recorded at public auction for that reference. The 1961 receipt, which my grandfather had kept in a manila envelope for 62 years, added $40,000 to the final figure, because it established continuous provenance from new. 11 digits. Copied into a phone on a Sunday morning 8 years before, while my grandfather made coffee in the back of the shop. I used a portion of the proceeds to restore the building, repointed the brick, replaced the windows, had the sign repainted by the same family who had painted it in 1971, in the same hand-lettered style, in the same gray that had once looked almost silver on certain afternoons. Callaway timepieces. I hired an assistant named Becca, 22 years old, who had applied for the job with a handwritten letter that asked not what the salary was, but whether she could learn. I sat her on the tall stool at the bench on her first Saturday, and put a movement in front of her, and told her to look at it, and tell me what she saw. She said she saw a lot of tiny things. I told her that was a good start. Philip called once, 4 months after the auction. His voice had the same volume it had always had, but something underneath had shifted. Some pressure had gone out of it. The way a tire that has lost air feels different under your hand, even before you can see the change. He said he supposed he had not fully understood the situation. He said he hoped there were no hard feelings. He said Dad would have wanted the family to stay connected. I told him I agreed that family mattered. I told him I would send a card at Christmas. Then I said I had work to get back to, and I ended the call. The shop door closes at 6 every evening. The latch clicks once. Not a slam. A click. the sound of a thing accounted for, a day that has been paid its full attention. Here is what 62 years of service records and 11 digits taught me. The people who dismiss you have almost always already told you what they think you're worth. They say it at dinner tables when they think you aren't listening. They say it in the way they reach past you for things you could have handed them. They look at the cracked crystal and the worn crown, and they make their calculation before they've even asked what's inside the case. What they don't know, what they are almost never capable of knowing, because dismissal is fundamentally incurious, is that the valuation they assigned you is a fact about their attention, not a fact about you. The watch was worth $2 million in 1961. It was worth $2 million. The afternoon my uncle laughed at it across a conference table. Their inability to see it did not change what it was by a single dollar. If someone in your life has ever looked at you and seen a broken thing, I want you to leave a comment below and tell me your story, because I think more people have been the watch than anyone admits, and I think we deserve to say so out loud. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed to House of Secrets yet, please do. It takes 3 seconds, and it means more than you know. That is my story. 1 broken watch, 11 digits, 62 years of receipts, and a grandfather who knew exactly what he was leaving and exactly who deserved to receive it. I'll see you in the next one.